Something is happening inside Iran right now that no one predicted. Not the analysts, not the intelligence agencies, not even the people living through it. The protests were expected. The anger was expected. But what is happening in the corridors of power, behind the walls of the most secretive military organization in the Middle East, was not supposed to be possible. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the most powerful armed force in Iran, the organization that built the regime's empire across 4 decades, the organization that crushed every uprising, silenced every dissenter, and buried every challenge to the Islamic Republic, is now turning its guns inward. And not at protesters, not at foreign enemies, at the supreme leader himself. For the first time in 47 years, sources inside Iran are reporting that IRGC commanders are circulating a single demand behind closed doors. One demand that, if spoken publicly, would have meant execution just 6 months ago. They want Mujtaba Khamenei to resign. Let that sink in for a moment. The organization that exists to protect the supreme leader is now the organization that wants him gone. But to understand why this is happening, you need to understand what broke first. Because this did not start with protests. This did not start with the economy. This started with a single moment of weakness that the regime cannot walk back. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Iran's power was never just military. It was psychological. For 47 years, the Islamic Republic built one message above everything else. We do not surrender. We do not bow. We do not negotiate from a position of weakness. Every sanction, every isolation, every crisis was absorbed and repackaged as proof of resilience. The regime's survival was not built on prosperity. It was built on the idea that resistance itself was the point. That idea is now dead. It died not with a missile strike, not with a coup. It died with a tweet. On April 17th, Iran's foreign minister posted on X that all commercial vessel passage through the Strait of Hormuz had been fully restored. No deal was announced, no guarantee was secured, no agreement was signed. The Strait, Iran's last genuine pressure card against the United States, was simply handed back. Unilaterally, quietly, in a social media post. And Iran exploded. Not from outside pressure, from within. The Strait of Hormuz was not just a waterway. It was the last lever Iran had over global oil markets. As long as it stayed closed, oil prices climbed. Climbing prices meant economic pressure on Washington. Economic pressure on Washington meant Iran had a seat at the table. The moment that Strait reopened without anything in return, Iran had no seat, no card, and no leverage. The IRGC understood this immediately. So did the hardliners in parliament. So did the millions of ordinary Iranians who had endured years of sanctions believing it was all building toward something. It was not building toward anything. Within hours, IRGC-linked media began calling the foreign minister a traitor. Hardline commentators on state television said he had shown flexibility on Hezbollah's funding, on Hamas support, on the very pillars the regime had told its people were non-negotiable. Since that moment, the foreign minister has not been seen in public, not once. But that was only the beginning of what was unraveling. Because what came next revealed something far more dangerous than a diplomatic failure. Trump responded to the reopening of the strait not with gratitude, not with a reciprocal gesture. He responded by announcing that Iran had agreed not to continue uranium enrichment. An announcement that Iranian officials immediately said was either fabricated or a distortion. And yet it did not matter whether it was true or false. What mattered was that regime insiders saw it as proof they had been played. Iran gave its card, received nothing, got misrepresented globally, and could not even deny it effectively without making the weakness worse. And in that moment, 3 separate wars inside Iran ignited simultaneously. The first war is between the IRGC and what remains of the civilian government. This conflict has been building for years, but it has now reached a breaking point that cannot be reversed. President Pezeshkian, elected on a platform of moderation, has been systematically dismantled from the inside. He cannot appoint his own cabinet without IRGC approval. When he attempted to apologize to Gulf states in March as a diplomatic gesture, IRGC commanders publicly contradicted him within hours. The president of Iran, the elected leader of the country, was openly overruled by an unelected military commander in front of the world. This is not a political dispute. This is a coup in slow motion. What most people don't realize is that Iran is no longer being governed by its constitution. Quietly, without an announcement, without a transition ceremony, without any formal acknowledgement, a 3-person committee of IRGC origin has assumed control of state decisions. Vahidi, the IRGC Supreme Commander, now functions as the country's de facto ruler. Zolgutter, the National Security Council Secretary, whose appointment was forced on the president by Vahidi's pressure, and Mohsen Rezai, one of the founding commanders of the IRGC, who spent 16 years leading the organization and now serves as the Supreme Leader's military advisor. None of them were elected. None of them are clerics. All 3 were shaped by the Iran-Iraq War, the construction of Hezbollah, and the nuclear standoffs of the 2000s. They do not understand compromise. They were not built for it. The second war is between the clergy and the IRGC, and this one cuts to the soul of what the Islamic Republic was supposed to be. The mullahs built this state. The revolution of 1979 was their revolution. The concept of velayat ifaqi, rule by the supreme Islamic jurist, was their theological invention. The idea that God's governance on earth required clerical authority was the justification for everything, for every execution, for every suppression, for every war. But now, for the first time, an IRGC origin committee is running the country without them, and the mullahs have realized something terrifying. If the Islamic Republic can function, or at least persist, without Islamic clerical leadership, then the Islamic part of the equation was always window dressing. The theocracy is becoming a military dictatorship, not gradually, now, visibly. And the clerics are watching it happen and cannot stop it. Former Culture Minister Ayatollah Mohammadi expressed what many clerics are privately saying, that Iran is losing not just the military confrontation, but the psychological war. The regime's narrative, its reason for existing, is disintegrating in real time. And the men who built that narrative no longer have the power to defend it or rebuild it. The third war is the one on the streets. And this is where it becomes something different entirely. The people filling the streets of Tehran, Isfahan, Mashhad, and over 200 cities across all 31 provinces are not the regime's enemies. They are, or were, the regime's core supporters. The families who sent sons to the front during the Iran-Iraq War. The communities that endured 3 decades of economic punishment because they believed the regime's promise that resistance had meaning. The ordinary Iranians who accepted the idea that sacrifice today would lead to strength tomorrow. That promise has been broken in front of them. Power cuts in Tehran now last up to 12 hours a day. Fuel queues stretch for kilometers. Food prices have risen more than 40%. Hospitals are reporting medicine shortages. Cancer treatments have been suspended. Chronic patients cannot access medication. ATMs in multiple cities ran empty. Small businesses are closing across the country. President Pezeshkian reportedly told IRGC commanders directly that if a ceasefire is not reached, the economy will completely collapse within 3 to 4 weeks. 3 to 4 weeks. He was not speaking to the public. He was warning the men who control the country. For years, the regime promoted what it called the resistance economy, the idea that Iran could become self-sufficient, that oil revenue could be replaced, that the West's financial system was irrelevant to Iran's survival. In Iran's 2026 to 2027 budget, oil revenue's share dropped from 32% to 5%, the lowest level since the 1960s. To compensate, taxes were raised by over 60%. The state began what economists describe as inflationary financing, printing money to cover obligations, a process that transfers wealth from ordinary people to the state invisibly. The resistance economy was not a policy, it was a slogan. And the people who paid for that slogan with their savings, their businesses, and their children are now in the streets asking why. But this is where things take a serious turn, because the protest movement that erupted in January 2026 was not just about economics. It was not just about electricity or fuel or food. Something happened in those protests that shook the regime in a way it has no answer for. People began chanting for the return of the Shah, not quietly, not in isolated corners, openly. In cities across the country, the House of Commons documented it. Voices demanding the restoration of the monarchy, demanding the return of Reza Pahlavi, rose visibly within the movement. And this is not simply a political preference. This is an existential threat to the Islamic Republic at its most fundamental level. The entire reason this regime exists, the entire justification for 1979, the entire founding mythology of the Islamic Republic, was built on the destruction of the Shah's monarchy. If 47 years later, Iranians are saying they want back what was overthrown, the revolution's legitimacy has not just weakened, it has inverted. The regime responded to the January uprising exactly as it always has. Security forces opened fire. In the days of January 8th and 9th, thousands were killed. Mass arrests followed. And for those in detention, the state issued a direct threat to their families. Attend the state-organized rally on February 11th, Revolution Day, or watch your relatives' sentence increase. The crowds that filled the streets waving flags on Revolution Day were not entirely there by choice. Some of them were there to save someone they loved. And when footage of the crackdown spread internationally, the regime deployed its final tool. State-aligned media and hardline clerics, including Mashhad's Friday prayer leader, Alam al-Hoda, declared that all street footage was artificial intelligence generated, that every video was fabricated, that the reality being witnessed by the world was a digital lie. When a regime cannot hide what it is doing, it declares reality itself to be fake. But now something has changed that the regime did not plan for. For 35 days after the selection of the new supreme leader Mujtaba Khamenei, there was no image, no public appearance, no voice, only written statements read by others. The supreme leader of Iran, the man theoretically at the apex of all power, has been invisible during the most critical weeks in the Islamic Republic's history. Reports indicate he sustained injuries. The nature and severity are unknown, but the effect is not unknown. In the vacuum, the three-person IRGC committee moved, and they moved fast. Here's what makes this moment unlike anything in Iran's history since 1979. In 1989, when Ayatollah Khamenei died, a functioning clerical and civilian command structure managed the transition in hours. Rafsanjani and the incoming supreme leader Ali Khamenei coordinated a seamless handover of power. The system worked because there was a system. That system no longer exists. What exists instead is a military committee with no democratic mandate, no clerical legitimacy, no public accountability, and no clear chain of command above them. And that committee is now receiving something it did not expect. Pressure from within the IRGC itself. The targeting operations that took place in the final days of March hit something deeper than infrastructure. They reached into the IRGC's sense of invulnerability. Commanders who believed themselves protected, operating in cities considered safe zones, were found and eliminated. Figures within the regime's internal security apparatus in Tehran, individuals connected to the organization responsible for domestic control, were hunted in places they believed no enemy could reach. The result has been something that, inside a security organization, is more dangerous than any external threat. Paranoia. Commanders are reducing communication with each other. Internal channels are being restricted. The question of who is feeding intelligence to Mossad or coalition agencies is being asked of everyone. And when a military organization cannot trust its own communication lines, cannot trust its own officers, and cannot identify the source of its leaks, its operational capacity does not just weaken. It begins to collapse from the inside without a single additional strike being needed. And in that atmosphere, the demand has emerged. The demand that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Senior IRGC figures, according to sources within Iran, are privately circulating the position that the supreme leader must step aside. That his invisible leadership during this crisis has made the situation worse. That his selection, rushed and opaque, has given Iran a figurehead who cannot command, cannot appear, and cannot stabilize the three wars burning simultaneously beneath him. This is what makes the current moment unlike every previous crisis the Islamic Republic has survived. In 2009, the Green Movement was a protest from below. The regime's power structure remained unified above it and crushed it. In 2019 and 2022, the uprisings were broader but still met a coherent state security response. In every previous crisis, the IRGC was the instrument of suppression. It stood with the leadership, it absorbed the blows, it restored order. Today, the IRGC is not standing with the leadership. Today, the IRGC is the crisis. When the organization that protects the supreme leader begins questioning the supreme leader, when the foundation of the state turns against the structure it was built to hold up, what you have is no longer a government managing unrest. What you have is a state in free fall. Iran's allies are watching this with growing alarm that they will not express publicly. China continues to buy Iranian oil, but the question of who authorizes the contracts, who guarantees delivery, and who can be held accountable for any disruption has no clear answer. Russia, which built a military relationship with Iran through drone technology and coordinated proxy strategies, no longer knows with certainty who speaks for Tehran in any agreement. And at every negotiating table where Iran is represented, the other side is now calculating whether the person across from them has the authority to deliver on anything they commit to. A state with no clear leader, a fractured military command, an economically broken population, and a legitimacy crisis that reaches back to the revolution's founding myth is not just unstable. It is approaching a threshold that history has documented many times before. The Soviet Union did not fall because the West won militarily. It fell because the people who ran the system stopped believing in it. The men who kept the machinery moving stopped moving it. Gorbachev did not destroy the USSR. The thousands of party officials who quietly stopped defending it destroyed it. Assad did not fall because of bombs. He fell because the generals who should have held the line chose not to. One by one, quietly, the pillars of the system decided the structure was not worth saving. And then, very suddenly, it was not there anymore. The Shah of Iran had one of the most modern and well-equipped militaries in the region. His regime looked formidable from every external angle. But when the soldiers were ordered to fire on the people, they lowered their weapons. When a military refuses to protect a regime, the regime has already ended. The ceremony just has not happened yet. Is Iran at that threshold today? Look at what exists simultaneously right now. A supreme leader who cannot appear in public during the worst crisis of his tenure. A president who cannot appoint his own cabinet. A three-person military committee governing by default with no constitutional basis. A clerical establishment watching its reason for existence dissolve in real time. Parliamentarians who are calling for the heads of their own diplomats. A population that has lost water, power, medicine, and savings. Protesters who were the regime's own base now chanting for the revolution's overthrow. IRGC commanders who are too afraid to communicate with each other, and whispers, growing louder, that the supreme leader should go. This is not a single problem. It is not a crisis with a solution waiting to be applied. It is a system simultaneously failing at every layer that holds a state together. And perhaps the most strategically remarkable aspect of this collapse is what did not cause it. No invading army crossed Iran's border. No overwhelming military campaign destroyed its capacity to function. No coalition forced to surrender at gunpoint. A sentence was spoken. A card was surrendered voluntarily. And Iran did the rest itself. The most powerful weapon deployed against the Islamic Republic in 47 years of confrontation was not a missile. It was not a sanction. It was the regime's own contradiction between what it promised its people for decades and what those people could see with their own eyes. When a regime tells its people for 47 years that it will never surrender, and then surrenders, it does not just lose a political argument. It loses the only thing that ever held the loyalty of its base. It loses the story. And without the story, what is left? Flags still wave. Slogans still echo. Rallies are still organized, some with attendance encouraged by the threat of consequences for absent families. The apparatus of power still functions at a surface level. The courts are still open. The security forces are still present. The television stations are still broadcasting. But underneath all of it, something fundamental has cracked. The people who once believed are now questioning. The commanders who once protected are now calculating. The clerics who once led are now watching. And the guards who once suppressed are now whispering. Throughout history, this is precisely how regimes end, not in a single dramatic explosion, not in a moment that can be predicted in advance. They end in the slow, invisible withdrawal of belief. Each person, each unit, each institution quietly decides the structure is no longer worth holding up. And then, when the moment comes, when the one final blow lands, there's nothing left to absorb it. The question that no one can answer right now, not in Washington, not in Beijing, not in Moscow, and certainly not in Tehran, is when that moment will come, or whether it is already here. What is certain is this: the Islamic Republic of Iran is not the same entity it was 6 months ago. The men running it are not the men who were supposed to run it. The loyalty holding it together is not the loyalty that once made it unbreakable, and the story it told its people, the story that survived 47 years of pressure from every direction, is no longer being believed by the people it was told to. A regime can survive poverty. It can survive war. It can survive international isolation. It cannot survive the moment its own foundation stops believing the story. Iran may have just reached that moment, and what happens next will not just change Iran, it will change the entire architecture of power in the Middle East, reshape the calculations of every government in the region, and answer a question that has been asked since 1979. How long can a revolution survive when the revolutionaries themselves have forgotten what they were fighting for?